Have you ever noticed, the harder we chase peace, the more it slips through our fingers, like water clutched in a closed fist? Or how we treat exhaustion like a badge of honor, until our body, quietly, says, no more. There's a strange paradox in modern life. We have more knowledge than ever, yet feel more lost. Surrounded by medicine, yet hungry for healing. Connected by technology, yet lonelier than ever. But what if I told you real healing doesn't begin with doing more? It begins with remembering something ancient, something already within you. In this journey, you and I are going to walk through 10 quiet paths, each one drawn from Buddhist wisdom, real human stories, and simple moments of awareness. We'll explore how your breath can soften your pain, how nature can make you feel whole again, and how letting go isn't losing, it's finally being free. And somewhere in chapter 6, there's a teaching, a subtle one, that holds the secret to becoming rich. Not in gold, but in energy, clarity, and inner spaciousness. When you hear it, something inside might click, and everything could shift. So I invite you now not just to watch, but to rest here, to breathe, to listen like we're sitting together in a quiet temple garden. Tea between us, leaves rustling gently in the wind. And if these reflections resonate with something deep in your heart, I'd be honored to have you join this journey. You can do that by subscribing softly, intentionally, like lighting a candle in a shared space of peace. Now come, let's begin. Chapter 1. The Lake Within. How the mind whispers to the body. I used to think stress was just something in the head, like a mental fog that would pass after a good night's sleep or a weekend off. But one day, I woke up and my body refused to move. Not in a dramatic movie scene kind of way. It was subtle. My shoulders were tight, like someone had tied invisible knots under the skin. My jaw had been clenched so long in sleep that it ached before I even spoke a word. My heart raced, but I hadn't run anywhere. I was 32 years old, and I felt like I'd aged decades overnight. And in that moment, lying still beneath soft morning light filtering through the curtains, a quiet voice inside asked, could your body be carrying something your mind hasn't let go of yet? That question didn't go away. It stayed with me through a season of life that felt heavy in ways I couldn't quite explain. I started noticing the tiniest connections. The way my stomach turned knots when I anticipated a difficult conversation. How my lower back ached more after a day full of worry than after a hike. The more I paid attention, the more I realized something simple, something that Buddhist teachings have echoed for centuries. The mind and the body are never truly apart. Imagine a still lake at dawn. There's mist hanging low over the surface, and if you look closely, you can see the sky reflected so perfectly in the water it's hard to tell which is which. Mind and body are like that, two reflections in one space. When the mind is calm, the body can reflect that peace. But when the mind is troubled, storm clouds ripple across the lake, disturbing everything beneath. One morning at the temple, I watched a young monk walk slowly across the garden courtyard. Each step he took was deliberate, silent, as if the earth itself was guiding his soles. He paused to pick a leaf from the path, gently placing it on a stone. Not hurried, not distracted, just present. I remember thinking that's how healing begins, not in grand gestures, but in the way we walk, breathe, notice. A restless mind doesn't just make you tired. It unbalances your entire inner ecosystem. That's what I hadn't understood. When anxiety took root in my mind, my digestion changed. When I was holding in resentment, my chest felt compressed. I used to think these symptoms were random, but they weren't. They were conversations, soft whispers from the body asking me to listen. Please slow down, they said. Please feel. In Buddhist psychology, the mind is not seen as some abstract thing separate from the body. It's considered one part of an interconnected whole. When we practice Chan Neem mindfulness, we are not only cultivating presence, we are inviting the body into peace. We are reminding ourselves, our breath, our bones, that it is safe to let go. A teacher once said to me, the body speaks in tension, but it heals in stillness. I've never forgotten that. And I see it now in my own life and in others, like Sarah, my friend who cared for her mother during the final stages of cancer. She never cried, never showed her grief outwardly. But within months, she developed an autoimmune condition that no doctor could trace to a specific cause. It wasn't until she joined a weekly meditation group that things began to shift. She didn't take any new medications. What she did do was sit with herself. For the first time in years, she breathed with her pain, allowed it to surface, and slowly her body began to soften. Isn't that remarkable? Not because it's a miracle, but because it's natural. Healing is what the body wants to do, it's its default state. But it needs our cooperation. It needs our mind to become a partner, not an adversary. I think of my grandmother, too. She lived through war, displacement, loss, but she rarely got sick. Her secret? She sang while she cooked. She prayed while she swept the floor. And at night, she would sit by the window, sipping tea, watching the moon, whispering mantras like lullabies to the night sky. Her peace was not circumstantial. It was chosen, created, protected. She used to tell me, "Bitterness ages the body. Forgiveness keeps it young." I didn't understand it as a child. Now I do. Let me ask you this. Have you ever walked into a room and felt tension in the air before anyone said a word? That's the mind-body connection at work, not just in you, but between us. We're energetic beings. When we are anxious, we broadcast it. When we are peaceful, others soften near us without knowing why. That's why a calm presence is one of the greatest medicines you can offer to yourself and the world. In Zen, there's a practice called Shikantaza, or just sitting. No goal, no trying to achieve a certain state. You just sit, breathing naturally, watching the thoughts rise and fall like waves on the ocean. The point is not to silence the mind, but to become so still inside that the body begins to trust again. And when the body trusts, it rests. And when it rests, it heals. Sometimes healing looks like a sigh that's been held for years, finally released. Sometimes it's tears that surprise you in the middle of a meditation, rising from a sorrow you didn't know you were still holding. And sometimes it's just silence, a sweet, nourishing, silent space inside, like standing under a waterfall of light. And you know what's beautiful? You don't have to become a monk to access this. You don't have to retreat to a mountain. All you need is this moment, this breath. So maybe right now, if it feels okay, let's take a breath together. Slowly, inhale and exhale. Let the breath touch your body. Let it say, "I'm here, you're safe." And feel, even if just a little, the way your shoulders soften when the mind quiets down. Because here's the quiet truth. Your body is not working against you. It's not broken. It's not weak. It's just been trying to get your attention. And what it's been saying all along is, let's come home, together. Somewhere in the distance, wind rustles the temple trees, and a bird calls out from the bamboo grove. You can almost hear it, can't you? Like nature itself is reminding us, stillness is not emptiness. Stillness is where life begins again. So if you're feeling unwell, tired, disconnected, maybe the first step isn't to push harder or search outwardly. Maybe the first step is to listen, to rest, to offer your mind a little kindness, to offer your body a little forgiveness. And if all of this feels new or even impossible, that's okay too. Healing doesn't need to happen all at once. It happens breath by breath, step by step, softly, like a lotus unfolding in the morning light. Not rushed, not forced, just allowed. In the Lotus Sutra, it is said that every being already has the Buddha nature, like a seed waiting for the right conditions to bloom. That includes your health, your peace, your return to wholeness. The seed is there, always has been. The only question is, what will you water it with? Perhaps today it starts with one thought, a gentle one that says, I trust myself to heal. I don't have to do it all right now. Peace is already here. I just forgot how to listen. And slowly, like that still lake beneath the sky, the ripples begin to settle. The reflection returns. Mind and body become one again. That's when healing begins. Chapter 2, where the ocean rests. Breathing into stillness. There was a time I thought rest was something you earned, like a reward for surviving the chaos. I used to believe that if I just got enough done, cleared the to-do list, finished all my tasks, then peace would come. But it never did. Peace didn't arrive in the form of a vacation. It didn't show up after the emails were answered or when the house was finally quiet. And no matter how many nights I collapsed into bed with a tired body, my mind kept spinning like clothes in a washing machine. One thought tumbling into the next. What if? Why didn't I? I should have. Then one morning, I sat at the edge of my bed, too exhausted to even reach for my phone, and I realized something almost embarrassingly simple. I had forgotten how to breathe. Not just inhale, exhale, mechanically. I mean really breathe. Deep, full, conscious breaths. The kind that make your shoulders drop, your heart soften, your eyes close without effort. The kind of breath that feels like a hug from the inside out. And it made me wonder, if I forgot how to breathe, what else have I been forgetting to feel? That was the day I began to listen to my breath, my body, my fatigue. And slowly, I found myself stepping into a rhythm not dictated by the noise around me, but by the gentle tide within. Close your eyes with me for a second. Just imagine, you're sitting in a quiet temple garden. There's a small koi pond nearby, the water gently rippling in the wind, lotus leaves floating like tiny green islands. Somewhere to your left, wind chimes sing when touched by the breeze. The stone under your feet is cool, grounding. You're not rushing, you're just here. And now you take a breath. Inhale through your nose. Feel the air as if it were a stream entering the forest of your body. Hold it for a heartbeat. Now exhale slowly, like fog clearing from a mountaintop. Let it go. And in that breath, you begin to return. That's what meditation really is. Not an escape. Not a technique to achieve enlightenment overnight. It's a quiet homecoming. A remembering. A reuniting with your own breath, your own presence. Buddhist monks have known this for centuries. They didn't sit cross-legged under trees to look spiritual for paintings or statues. They sat because they understood that the breath is the bridge between the mind and the body, the gentle gate through which healing walks in. I once met a man named Daniel who struggled with excruciating headaches for nearly a decade. He had tried everything, painkillers, expensive scans, even acupuncture. Nothing seemed to help. His pain would come in waves, sometimes forcing him to lie flat in a dark room for hours. And then, on the recommendation of a friend, he reluctantly joined a meditation group. I don't really do that Zen stuff, he told me, laughing, but he was desperate, so he went. The first session, he couldn't sit still. His knees ached. His mind was wild. I thought I was doing it wrong, he told me. I thought meditation was supposed to be peaceful, but all I felt was more chaos. But he kept going. Day after day, week after week, he showed up. He sat. He breathed. He cried, sometimes without knowing why. And then one day, the headache didn't come. Then a week passed. Then a month. That man, who once lived in fear of his own body, found relief not through more doing, but through allowing. It wasn't magic. It was space, stillness, softness. You see, the mind is like the surface of the ocean. When a storm moves through, the waves rise. They crash. The water churns. But beneath all that, deep down in the heart of the sea, it's always still, always silent. Meditation is how we dive down into that depth. Not to escape the waves, but to remember that we're more than the chaos. I think we all forget that sometimes, especially in today's world where everything is urgent, where silence is rare, where even when we sit down to rest, we're still scrolling, still absorbing, still comparing ourselves to lives curated for perfection. But what would happen if we just paused? For one breath, I once asked an elderly monk why he meditated every morning before sunrise. He smiled, eyes twinkling, and said, "Because it teaches my mind to greet the day gently, instead of chasing it like a dog chasing cars." That image stuck with me, and it's true. Most of us wake up already behind, already in panic mode. But meditation teaches us a different rhythm. A rhythm more like nature. A tree doesn't rush to bloom. The wind doesn't worry where it's going. The sun doesn't try to rise faster. Everything simply is. That's the heart of it, really. When you sit with your breath, you stop fighting time. You stop chasing solutions. You stop trying to fix yourself like a broken machine. And instead, you remember. You remember that you are already whole. You remember that your breath has always been with you, since the moment you arrived into this world. That even in your worst moments, grief, rage, fear, heartbreak, your breath never left you. Maybe it became shallow, maybe it trembled, but it stayed. And now you can meet it again, with gratitude, with reverence. Sometimes when I guide meditations for beginners, I ask them to place a hand over their heart and another over their belly, just to feel the rise and fall. Seems so simple, but you'd be amazed how many people cry in that moment. Because for the first time in years, they're feeling again, not thinking, not analyzing, just feeling. And in that feeling, the armor begins to crack. It's not always easy. The mind resists, throws thoughts like confetti, tries to distract, derail, discourage. But that's part of the practice. Not pushing the thoughts away, but watching them float past like clouds in a blue sky. You don't chase them. You don't fight them. You just see them and return to the breath again and again. That's the secret no one tells you. It's not about stopping your thoughts. It's about returning gently every time. And every time you return, something heals. Not because you forced it, but because you allowed it. The Dalai Lama once said, "Sleep is the best meditation." And I used to laugh at that, but now I understand, because both require surrender. Both require trust. And in a world obsessed with control, surrender is a radical act of peace. So maybe tonight, instead of reaching for your phone one last time, try placing your hand on your heart. Feel the beat. Feel the breath. Say thank you, not to anyone else, but to yourself, for surviving, for breathing, for being here. And then let go. Let the breath guide you into silence. Not the silence of absence, but the silence that is full of presence. The silence where your cells begin to remember how to rest, where your nervous system resets, where the ocean within you goes still. And maybe, just maybe, you'll hear it again, the soft voice beneath the noise. The voice that says, "Welcome back." Chapter 3. The tea is speaking. Are you listening? I used to think mindfulness was something you practiced on a cushion. You know, eyes closed, spine straight, incense swirling in the air. Maybe a little bell ringing softly in the distance. That's what I imagined when I heard the word mindful living. Some beautiful scene in a mountain retreat, not the messy, ordinary life I was actually living. But mindfulness didn't find me in a monastery. It found me in the middle of a Tuesday morning, with cold coffee in one hand, my phone in the other, scrolling through bad news while trying to answer emails, half listening to someone talk about their day. That's when it hit me. I wasn't living my life. I was multitasking through it, rushing from one thing to another, rarely arriving. Always busy, but strangely empty. It was like I had turned into a machine, checking boxes but forgetting how it felt to be alive. And maybe you felt that too. Maybe you've eaten a whole meal and couldn't remember a single bite. Maybe you've taken a walk but didn't notice the color of the sky. Maybe someone was speaking to you, and you were already composing your reply before they even finished. I get it. I really do. But somewhere inside that blur of days, I heard a story. A Zen story, the kind that doesn't feel important at first, but then it sits with you for days. A young student once visited a Zen master, seeking wisdom. He arrived excited, eager, talking nonstop about everything he had read and learned. The master listened quietly, then began to pour tea. The cup filled, then overflowed. Tea spilled onto the table, dripping onto the floor. The student panicked. "Master, the cup is full. It can't hold any more." The master looked at him gently and said, "Exactly, you are like this cup. So full, there is no room to receive." It was quiet for a while after that. And then the master added, "If you can't drink tea mindfully, you can't live mindfully." I remember hearing that and putting my phone down. Slowly, I looked at the cold cup of coffee next to me. It hadn't even been touched. That moment changed something in me. I realized mindfulness wasn't something you schedule. It's something you bring into everything you do, or you don't. But the invitation is always there. To start small, slower, simpler, I began with meals. Instead of eating while scrolling, I sat down at the table. No distractions, just the food. I noticed the warmth of the bowl in my hands, the smell of ginger and garlic, the texture of rice against my tongue. I chewed, slowly, gratefully, and something unexpected happened. The meal felt sacred, like prayer, and my stomach, which always used to feel heavy after eating, felt calm, light, nourished. Next, I brought mindfulness to walking. No headphones, no podcast, just my feet and the earth beneath them. I began to notice the rhythm of my steps, the shift in my balance, the sound of leaves crunching underfoot. I saw how the sun hit the tops of the trees at certain hours, how the air smelled different after rain. And just like that, a 5-minute walk became a journey into presence. Then came conversations. This one was harder. I noticed how often I listened just to reply, how often I interrupted or wandered mentally while someone was speaking. But when I began to really listen, not to fix, not to judge, just to receive, something beautiful unfolded. People softened. They opened, because they could feel I was truly there. And I did too. It was like 1,000 tiny doors opening all around me. And that's what mindfulness really is, not an effort, but a return. Not a practice of trying to be better, but a gentle remembering that life is already happening. And we've just been missing it. Buddhist wisdom calls this sati, presence, full awareness, noticing the moment as it is without dressing it up or pushing it away. It's not about perfection. It's about intimacy with your breath, your food, your body, the person beside you, the silence between sounds, the pause between heartbeats. One afternoon, I visited a quiet temple garden in the hills. It was just after a light rain. The stones were still wet, darkened by water. Leaves stuck to the path like quiet poems. A monk was sweeping, slowly, carefully, as if each fallen leaf was a message. I asked him why he didn't just wait for the leaves to finish falling before cleaning the path. He smiled and said, "The path is not the goal. The sweeping is." And that line stays with me, because in modern life we are always trying to get somewhere, to finish, to optimize, to be efficient. But mindfulness teaches us, the moment is not a means to an end, it is the end. When you wash a dish, just wash the dish. Feel the water, the curve of the bowl, the scent of the soap. When you speak with someone, just be there. Let your eyes meet. Let your breath match theirs. When you breathe, just breathe. This is how we begin to heal, not through grand acts of self-improvement, but through humble acts of attention. Through seeing what's always been here, waiting for us to notice. And it's not about being calm all the time. That's not realistic. Life is messy. Our minds wander. We forget. That's okay. The practice is simply in the return. Over and over. Gently, like a mother guiding her child back onto the path. I remember once watching an elderly woman sip her tea on a park bench. She didn't look at her phone. She didn't seem in a rush. She held the cup with both hands. She paused between sips. She closed her eyes once. And in that still moment, she looked radiant, like someone who had learned the art of presence. I wanted to ask her how she learned that, but I didn't need to. She had already shown me, because sometimes the best teaching isn't in words. It's in the way someone lives. So here's what I've learned. Healing doesn't wait for the weekend. Peace isn't a vacation. Joy isn't in the future. They all live here, in this moment, in this breath, in the way you pour your tea, in the way you close your eyes at night, in the way you greet someone with your whole attention. And you don't need to change your whole life, just the way you meet your life, one breath at a time. The next time you eat, try tasting the first bite with full awareness. The next time you walk, feel the ground. The next time someone speaks, listen as if they were the only sound in the world. These are not small things. They are everything. They are the doorway back to now. And now is where the medicine is. Chapter 4. What we plant, we become. Karma and the quiet roots of illness. I used to think karma meant punishment. Like if something bad happened, it must be because I did something wrong in a past life or maybe just last Tuesday. I imagined some invisible judge tallying up my rights and wrongs, like cosmic math. If I got sick, it was because I deserved it. If things went well, I must have done something good. But life doesn't work like that. Not in the way we fear, and not in the way we often misunderstand. I learned this slowly. The way seeds grow underground before anyone sees the green. It started with my own body. I was young, still in my 20s, when my chest began to tighten for no reason. My heart raced when I was just sitting still. I thought maybe it was caffeine, or maybe something wrong with my heart. I had tests done. They all came back normal, but my body didn't feel normal. It felt like it was carrying something heavy, something I couldn't explain. It wasn't until I sat with an old Buddhist teacher during a silent retreat in the hills that something clicked. He looked at me with eyes that seemed to see through everything and asked one question. What are you still holding on to? I didn't know what to say, but that night, lying in a simple wooden cabin under the rustle of temple trees, I began to cry. Not for one moment, but for hours. I cried for things I hadn't even thought about in years. Old regrets, anger I thought I'd buried, grief I hadn't dared to name, and for the first time in a long time, I could breathe deeply again. That was when I began to understand. Karma isn't punishment. Karma is momentum. It's the direction your energy is flowing. The seeds you plant, whether consciously or unconsciously, are growing roots inside you, even if you're not looking. We often think karma is about grand events, but more often it shows up in subtler ways. In the way your shoulders hunch when you feel unworthy. In the way your stomach knots when you suppress sadness. In the way your immune system weakens when you carry too much resentment. Just as a farmer cannot plant mango seeds and expect to harvest apples, we cannot feed ourselves thoughts of fear, bitterness, or self-hatred and expect a harvest of vitality. The body listens to what the mind repeats. There's a woman I met named Claire. She was in her late 40s, a nurse who had cared for others her entire life, but she always put herself last. She smiled through exhaustion, held in grief when her brother passed, and never once cried, not even at the funeral. She didn't believe in indulgence, as she called it, but over the years, her health began to deteriorate. Autoimmune issues, digestive trouble, constant fatigue. When we spoke, she told me something I've never forgotten. I think my body is angry at me for not listening, and she was right, not in a metaphorical sense, but in a real biological one. Science is beginning to confirm what Buddhist monks have known for centuries. Unprocessed emotion becomes tension. Chronic stress alters immune response. Grief lives in the lungs. Rage tightens the chest. Shame stiffens the spine. In Buddhist thought, your thoughts and actions are seeds, and the body is the field. You cannot control all the weather, but you can decide what you plant. One of the most compassionate realizations you can have is this: just because you have planted pain before, doesn't mean you can't start planting peace now. You are not bound by your past momentum. You are not doomed to repeat the suffering of yesterday. Karma is not destiny. It is simply cause and effect. It is a pattern, and patterns can be changed when they are seen clearly and met with love. Imagine your body like a garden. Maybe parts of it have been neglected. Maybe weeds have grown from years of criticism, overwork, fear. That's okay. Every garden goes through seasons, but what matters is what you do now. Do you speak to your body with kindness, or do you scold it for not being enough? Do you let yourself rest when tired, or do you push through with resentment? Do you carry old pain like a badge, or do you give yourself permission to begin again? There's a Japanese practice I love called kintsugi, the art of mending broken pottery with gold. Instead of hiding the cracks, they are filled with radiant lacquer, making the breakage part of the beauty. It's a reminder that healing does not mean erasing the past. It means honoring the journey and choosing to transform the fracture into something sacred. Our karma can be like that too. When you meet your pain with compassion, you turn wounds into wisdom. When you meet your anger with understanding, you learn where you are still aching. When you meet your body with gentle curiosity, you begin to unlock its messages. I once sat in a hospital waiting room with my father during a time when his health was uncertain. He was silent, eyes heavy with fear, staring out the window at a single tree swaying in the wind. After a long pause, he said, "I spent so much of my life being mad, I didn't realize I was poisoning myself." His voice cracked, and I realized then, some karmas aren't just ours. They are inherited, patterns passed down through generations, silently shaping how we respond to life. But someone has to be the one to break the cycle, or more accurately, to plant something new. You don't need to fix everything all at once. You just need to notice, breathe, choose differently, forgive a little sooner, pause before reacting, rest when your body whispers instead of waiting until it screams. Start small. Start today. Even just a moment of gratitude shifts your inner chemistry. Even one deep breath with full awareness can calm the nervous system. Even a soft whisper of self-kindness, said before bed, plants the seed of healing. And those seeds grow, slowly, silently, faithfully. Buddhism teaches that even the smallest intentional action ripples outward, not just into the world, but into the body, into the cells, into the very rhythm of your breath. So here's a gentle invitation. What are you planting with your thoughts today? Is it fear or trust? Is it self-judgment or compassion? Is it numbness or presence? You don't need to get it perfect. You don't need to always be positive. Just be real. Be kind. Be awake. The garden of your body responds to your attention. It responds to your love. And the beautiful thing is, you can always start again. Right now, with this breath, with the way you sit, with the way you speak to yourself when no one else is listening. A monk once told me, the fruit takes time, but the planting is instant. So plant gently, plant wisely, because what you plant is what you become. Chapter 5. The forest remembers you, returning to nature, returning to wholeness. I used to think I needed to escape somewhere far away to feel whole again. A retreat in the mountains, maybe, or some untouched corner of the world where I could leave behind the noise, the emails, the deadlines, the pressure to be fine. But then one day, in the middle of a very ordinary week, I took off my shoes and stepped into my backyard after a morning rain, and everything changed. The grass was still wet, soft, alive underfoot. Each step made a quiet sound. Chut, 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 like the earth exhaling through my soles. I wasn't trying to be spiritual. I wasn't practicing anything. I was just barefoot and tired. But then a breeze moved through the trees, and for a brief moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt held, not by a person, not by a system, but by the earth itself, as if it was saying, "Welcome back." And that was the beginning of a kind of healing I didn't even know I needed. I don't know when exactly we began forgetting nature, but somehow, as our lives grew more advanced, we drifted further from the ground beneath our feet. We paved it, covered it, built walls against it, convinced ourselves we didn't need it. But the truth is, we didn't outgrow nature, we just grew out of touch with it. And the body, like a plant kept from sunlight, remembers. Buddhist monks have always known this. They don't chant in glass towers or high-tech rooms. They sit in the forests, in caves, by rivers. The Buddha didn't reach enlightenment in a palace. He did it under a tree, a Bodhi tree, its leaves catching wind, its roots drinking from the soil. No artificial light, no special cushion, just him, his breath, and the great wide sky. Because something sacred happens when we return to the living world that made us. Have you ever stood beneath a tree older than your grandfather? Felt its bark, rough and ancient, and wondered what it's seen? Have you ever walked through a pine forest so quiet you could hear your own heartbeat? Or stood by a stream and noticed how it never once questioned where to go? Nature doesn't hurry. A tree grows when it grows. The sun rises without your alarm. The moon doesn't stress about deadlines. And in that rhythm, we remember our own. I once spent a week at a forest monastery. It wasn't fancy. Just wooden huts, dirt paths, and a few silent meals shared with others. There was no Wi-Fi, no phone service, no mirrors, On the third day, I cried not from sadness, but from the stillness. I cried because I realized how much of my life had been noise, how much I'd been running, not from danger, but from silence. I didn't know who I was without the noise. And yet, as the days passed, something softened. My thoughts slowed, my breathing deepened, and one morning, while sitting under a banyan tree, I felt something I hadn't felt since childhood. Wholeness. Not because I had fixed everything, not because I had found something, but because I had finally stopped resisting. The forest didn't judge me. The birds didn't care about my achievements. The wind didn't need me to be anyone. It just moved through me, like grace. That's when I began to understand. Healing doesn't always come from doing more. It comes from belonging again. And nature has always offered that to us. Quietly, generously, even when we forgot. There's a Japanese practice called Shinrin-yoku, forest bathing. It doesn't involve water. It simply means being in the forest, slowly, with your senses open. Not to hike, not to exercise, but to be. Studies now show it reduces cortisol, lowers blood pressure, improves sleep. But you don't need a study to feel it. Just go. Walk among trees. Leave your phone in your pocket. Let your eyes linger. Let your breath match the rhythm of the birdsong. And you'll feel it, the return. Because we are not separate from nature. We are nature. The iron in your blood once came from ancient stars. The calcium in your bones once lived in the soil. Your breath is a gift from the trees. Every inhale a whisper of leaves. Every exhale a prayer returned. So when you're overwhelmed, when life feels too much, step outside. Even if it's just your porch, even if it's just a window, feel the warmth of the sun on your face. Let it remind you, you are not broken. You're just tired of being indoors. Let the wind touch your skin. It doesn't need you to be fixed. It just wants you to feel again. And if it rains, let it rain. Let it wash away what no longer needs to stay. Let it cleanse you the way it does the earth. Softly, steadily. I met a woman once who had lost her husband. She was quiet, gentle, like someone who had been cracked open and still shimmered with grace. When I asked her how she coped with the grief, she said, "I go and sit by the lake. The water doesn't talk, but it listens." And I never forgot that. Nature listens, without words, without judgment. The moss growing between stones, the call of a distant owl, the way light dances on morning dew. These things don't solve our problems, but they remind us of something deeper. They remind us that life is still beautiful, that we're still part of something sacred, that our pain is not the end of the story, just part of the turning season. A river doesn't stop flowing when a stone blocks its path. It moves around, continues, and so can we. So maybe today, even if only for 5 minutes, go outside. Take off your shoes. Stand in the grass. Breathe in the sky. Feel the pulse of the world returning to you. Not as a performance, not as a ritual, but as a reunion. The lotus doesn't bloom in the clouds. It blooms in the mud, in the water, in the wind, and so do we. Wholeness was never far away. It was just waiting for us to remember how to walk barefoot again. Chapter 6. When the sky clears, detoxing the mind, softly. I used to think exhaustion came from doing too much, from working long hours, juggling too many responsibilities, never taking breaks. But then there came a time in my life, maybe you've had one too, when I was doing less than ever before. And yet, I felt more tired than I had in years. It wasn't my body that was worn out. It was my mind. And here's the strange thing. I didn't even realize how heavy it had become until one quiet afternoon when I was sitting in a temple garden after a short walking meditation, sipping tea alone. The steam rose slowly from the cup. There was the distant sound of a bamboo chime, swaying with the wind. And for a few rare seconds, my mind fell silent. Not because I forced it to, but because I had finally paused long enough to notice just how much noise was living inside me. It was as if I had been carrying a full suitcase for years, without realizing I had the option to put it down. That's when I first heard the phrase from a monk sitting beside me, gently stirring his tea. You cannot fill a cup that's already full. And I thought of my mind like that, like a glass of water, murky and cloudy from years of unexpressed grief, worry, fear, self-criticism, comparison, all swirling inside. No wonder nothing could settle. No wonder I couldn't see clearly. No wonder I couldn't rest. And so began a gentle practice of clearing. Not fixing, not forcing, just clearing. Imagine this with me now. There's a stream running through a forest, the kind where sunlight dances on the water. You sit at the edge, knees drawn up, watching leaves drift by. One by one, the leaves fall into the stream, each one a thought, a memory, a story you've been holding. There's that time you were hurt and never told anyone. There's that worry you've been carrying, whispering what if every night before sleep. There's the shame, the regret, the heartbreak. You don't chase the leaves. You don't try to catch them. You just watch. And in watching, you begin to let go. That's what mental detox is. Not erasing thoughts, not achieving some perfect state of calm, but releasing what no longer needs to be held. So much of our tiredness comes not from our actions, but from the invisible weight of emotions we've refused to feel. The anger we swallow, the grief we postpone, the guilt we wear like a second skin. It's like trying to live your life with your jaw clenched all the time. Eventually, something breaks. A friend once told me, "It's not that I don't have time to rest. It's that I don't know how to stop thinking long enough to feel rested." And I understood completely, because we've been conditioned to keep going, to suppress, to distract, to perform strength even when we're breaking inside. But healing, true healing, requires stillness, space. That's why in Buddhism, the breath is more than a function. It's medicine. Each conscious exhale is an invitation to soften, to clear the clouds, to begin again. There's a practice I love that I want to share with you now. It's simple. You don't need anything, just your breath and your presence. Sit down. Close your eyes if it feels right. Breathe in slowly. And as you breathe out, imagine releasing one thought that no longer serves you. One old fear. One should have. One tight knot of emotion that's been buried in your chest. Do this 3 times. Not to force the emotion out, but to give it permission to move, to flow. Because energy, when trapped, becomes suffering. But when it moves, it becomes wisdom. There's a Buddhist saying I come back to often: pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. The pain may have happened long ago, but the suffering is in the holding. We hold on to past betrayals, harsh words, moments we wish we could rewrite. We hold them in our bodies. Tight shoulders, clenched jaws, shallow breath. But we also hold them in our hearts. So maybe the first act of detoxing isn't about discipline. Maybe it's about forgiveness. Forgiving yourself for the things you didn't know back then. Forgiving others who were acting from their own wounds. Forgiving the world for being chaotic and unfair. Not because any of it was okay, but because you deserve to be free. You deserve to feel light again. There's a moment in every spiritual path when we realize the past can't be changed, but it can be released. And from that release comes clarity. The clouds lift, the sky returns, and for the first time in a long time we can see the stars again. Gratitude helps with this too. It's more powerful than most people realize. It's not just about making a list of nice things. It's about shifting the current of your mind. Gratitude repatterns your inner chemistry. It tells your nervous system, we are safe now. It allows your body to rest. So tonight, before you sleep, try this. Name 3 things you're grateful for. They don't have to be profound, just real. The warmth of your blanket, the sound of rain on the window, the fact that you showed up today, even if your heart was heavy. This is how we empty the cup drop by drop, with breath, with silence, with truth. A friend once told me about her father, a war survivor who never spoke of his trauma. Decades passed, his body aged, his spirit dimmed. Then one day, sitting by the ocean, he finally cried. Long, silent tears. And after that, his health began to improve. Because tears are cleansing. Silence is sacred. And nature always waits for us to come home. So does your mind. So does your breath. You don't have to be a monk to begin clearing the inner sky. You just have to be willing to pause, to sit at the edge of the stream and watch the leaves float by, to exhale, just a little softer than before, to believe even gently that peace is still possible. Because it is. The mind is not your enemy. It's just full and tired and ready, so ready to be held in kindness again. Chapter 7. The gentle weight of kindness, compassion as the ultimate medicine. Do you remember a time when someone was kind to you, not because they had to, not because it benefited them, but simply because they saw you? Maybe it was small. A hand on your shoulder when you were about to break. A stranger's smile when you felt invisible. A friend who stayed quiet just so you could cry. And for a moment, in that warmth, something in you softened. We talk so much about medicine as something we take. But what if some of the deepest healing comes not from pills or prescriptions, but from presence, from compassion? There's a story I heard once about a monk who was climbing a steep mountain path. On his back was a heavy sack, full of grain, perhaps, or offerings, or maybe symbolic burdens he had vowed to carry for others. As he walked, a traveler passed by and asked, "Why don't you put it down and rest?" The monk smiled and replied, "Isn't this what people do with their pain? They carry it up the mountain, long after it's needed." That story stayed with me, because we all carry sacks like that. Maybe not filled with grain, but with old grudges, wounds, regrets, invisible weights that grow heavier each year. And yet we keep going, not because we want to suffer, but because we've forgotten we're allowed to set it down. And the moment we offer compassion to ourselves or to another is the moment the weight begins to lift. I remember when a close friend lost her mother. Everyone said the usual things. "She's in a better place. Be strong. Time heals." But she told me later that the thing that helped most was when someone simply sat beside her, held her hand, and said, "You don't have to be okay today. No fixing, no advice, just presence, just a quiet kind of love." That's what compassion really is. Not pity, not sympathy, but the willingness to see someone's pain and not turn away. And in that seeing, something sacred happens, not just for them, but for us. Buddhist wisdom tells us, when we help others out of suffering, we ease our own. Not because we're earning good karma, but because the boundaries between self and other begin to dissolve. We stop seeing the world as me versus you, and start remembering that we all bleed the same color. Have you ever noticed how your chest feels when you're angry at someone? The tightness, the fire, the storm of thoughts? And then compare it to how your chest feels when you forgive, when you let go, when you choose peace over being right. The body doesn't lie. Compassion is healing not just in theory, but in chemistry. Studies now show that acts of kindness release oxytocin, calm the nervous system, lower blood pressure. But long before science caught up, monks knew this truth, that to love is to free yourself. There's another story from Zen tradition. Two monks were walking together when they came across a woman unable to cross a muddy river. Though their vows forbade them from touching women, the older monk picked her up, carried her across, and gently set her down. Hours later, the younger monk exploded, "We're monks. We don't do that." The elder smiled. "I set her down hours ago. Why are you still carrying her? We carry so much, don't we? That grudge from 5 years ago. That betrayal we replay every time we close our eyes. That resentment toward a parent, a partner, a past version of ourselves." But compassion is the softening of the grip. It's the hand that unties the knot. It's the moment when you say to yourself, "Yes, it hurt, but I don't need to keep bleeding." And here's something that always brings me back. The sun does not choose who to shine on. It gives its light freely, without asking who deserves it. Compassion, too, doesn't diminish when shared. In fact, it grows. The more you give it, the more it returns. Not always from the same person, but from life itself. I once met an elderly woman at a meditation retreat. She had wrinkles deep as rivers, hands that trembled slightly as she folded her robe each morning. She smiled often, spoke little. One day I asked her what brought her to the practice. She looked at me and said softly, I spent half my life angry, the other half learning how to forgive. I don't want to spend my last years forgetting that joy comes from gentleness. That's the thing, compassion isn't grand. It's not a public act. Sometimes it's doing the dishes without being asked, holding back a sharp word, offering the benefit of the doubt, or simply saying, "I'm here," when there's nothing else left to say. But perhaps the most overlooked compassion is the one we owe ourselves. We are so hard on ourselves. We speak to our own hearts in ways we'd never speak to a friend. We judge, we blame, we rehearse failures, we carry guilt like armor. And yet, your heart beats anyway. Your breath rises anyway. Your soul waits patiently for you to come back home. So if no one's told you this recently, you're allowed to rest. You're allowed to be imperfect. You're allowed to start again. Because compassion doesn't mean excusing harm. It means understanding where the pain began and choosing not to pass it forward. There's a little practice I return to whenever I feel myself closing off, tightening from stress, judgment, fear. I place one hand over my heart, close my eyes, and whisper, "May I be kind to myself in this moment. May I offer to others what I long for, too." Sometimes I cry, sometimes I just breathe, but always I soften. And that softening, that's the medicine. So if today you feel heavy, tired from being strong, remember it's okay to set the sack down. It's okay to not have it all figured out. It's okay to offer yourself the same compassion you've so easily given to others. Because when you do, you'll find that something opens. The river flows again. The wound breathes. And in that space, love walks in, quietly, gently, like morning light through temple windows. Not to fix you, but to remind you, you were never broken. You were just waiting to be seen. Chapter 8. The sound that heals, vibrational stillness, and the quiet medicine of chanting. I used to think healing had to be loud, dramatic, full of motion, like a breakthrough on a mountaintop, or some life-changing event that left you weeping in the rain. But I've learned something else. Sometimes, healing sounds like a whisper, like a soft hum in the chest when no one's watching, like the echo of a chant rolling off cave walls, centuries old, vibrating gently through your bones. Sometimes, healing feels like the moment you say nothing but feel everything. There was a moment years ago when I sat inside a mountain temple in northern Thailand. I had just finished a long hike, sweaty, sore, slightly sunburned, and entered the stillness of a quiet meditation hall carved partly into stone. There were candles flickering, the smell of old wood, incense, and something earthy filled the air. And then it happened. A group of monks began to chant Om Mani Padme Hum. Low, steady, rhythmic. The sound didn't just echo through the walls. It echoed through me. I felt it in my chest first, then in my throat, then in that place between breath and thought. It was as if something ancient within me had been waiting for that sound. Not as entertainment, not as information, but as medicine. Not loud, not flashy, but deeply alive. That was the first time I realized healing can begin with vibration. The human body, after all, is a collection of frequencies. Your heartbeat pulses, your breath hums, your bones resonate, your cells respond to rhythm just like a tuning fork responds to music. And chanting? It's more than tradition. It's more than a spiritual aesthetic. It's a way of tuning the instrument of the body back to harmony. In Buddhist temples, monks don't chant just to recite. They chant to realign, to regulate their nervous systems, to soften the restlessness of the mind, to bring the breath, the body, the spirit into one place, one moment. Imagine the sound Om. Just that one syllable. Take a breath with me now. Let it be soft. Let it settle in your belly. Now gently hum Om out loud, or in your heart if you're in a public space. Can you feel the vibration? In your throat, in your chest, maybe even behind your eyes. That's not just sound. That's energy moving. A subtle massage for your inner world. I once met a man who struggled with anxiety. Years of it. Doctors, pills, meditation apps, you name it. Nothing truly settled him. Until one day, in frustration, he sat in his car and began to hum. Not sing, just hum. Low and quiet, letting the sound rise and fall naturally. He said he didn't know what he was doing, but after 5 minutes, he felt calmer than he had in months. Because something about humming slows the breath. It grounds the awareness. It stimulates the vagus nerve, science will tell you that part, and that relaxes the whole system. But deeper than biology, humming is remembering. A baby hums when comforted. A mother coos when holding her child. Even the wind hums through pine trees, and oceans hum in their own deep way. Sound is primal, and healing often speaks through vibration before words. In Buddhist tradition, certain chants are known as mantras, repeated sounds with spiritual intention. But you don't need to be fluent in Sanskrit or Pali to benefit from this. Even a simple sound, one syllable, one steady note, can be enough to begin the process. Because healing doesn't always come from effort. Sometimes it comes from surrender, from allowing the sound to do the work, from letting the hum carry you where words cannot. I remember chanting alone for the first time. Felt awkward, strange. I was in my living room, unsure if the neighbors could hear, but I lit a candle, closed my eyes, placed a hand over my heart, and just began. The sound wasn't pretty, but it was real, and after a few repetitions, something clicked. I wasn't thinking anymore. I was just vibrating, just being. And that's when I understood this wasn't about performance. It was about presence. The chant didn't fix my life, but it calmed the storm inside me enough to see clearly again. And that too is healing. Sometimes we want the problem to disappear, but what we really need is the strength to sit with it differently, to hold it in a softer light, to let it unravel at its own pace. Sound can help you do that, especially when the mind is too busy to meditate in silence, especially when the heart is too raw for words, especially when you've forgotten how to be soft with yourself. So here's something simple. When the day feels heavy, try this. Sit somewhere quiet, take a slow breath in, and on the exhale, hum a soft tone, any tone. Let the sound move through you. Let it rise. Let it fall. No judgment, no goal, just vibration, just being. And if you're more drawn to mantra, you might try Om Mani Padme Hum, or simply Om, or even Ah, the sound of opening, because that's what this practice does. It opens, it unlocks, it says, you don't have to carry this alone. You are sound, you are resonance, you are more vibration than form. And when your energy returns to harmony, everything else begins to follow. I met a woman at a retreat who told me she chants while cooking, just softly as she stirs the soup. She says it turns the kitchen into a temple. And somehow, everyone says her food feels like a warm hug. That's vibration too. That's intention flowing through sound, through hands, into the world. This isn't about becoming mystical. It's about becoming mindful of your breath, of your tone, of how you carry energy in your voice, even in silence. Because silence has sound too. In temples, silence is not empty. It vibrates. You can feel it in the way your breath settles, the way your heart finds rhythm, the way stillness hums beneath all the noise of the world. And maybe that's what we're all really craving. Not just solutions, but resonance. The sense that we are in tune again with ourselves, with life, with something sacred. So the next time you feel lost, try listening not to more thoughts, but to more silence. The next time you feel tense, hum. The next time you pray, sing it softly. And the next time your heart aches, sit quietly. Let a gentle chant rise through you. And remember, the universe was not built in silence. It was born in sound. And so were you. You are allowed to heal by humming. You are allowed to cry through mantras. You are allowed to chant yourself back to stillness. Because in this world of constant noise, there is a sound that's been waiting for you. And it begins with your breath. Chapter 9. The hungry mind and the empty heart, eating and fasting with awareness. I used to believe that eating was simple. You get hungry, you eat, done. But the more I observed my own habits and listened to the stories of those around me, the more I began to see, most of us aren't just feeding our bodies. We're feeding our loneliness, our boredom, our stress, our fear. And food, It often becomes the language we use when we don't know how to say, "I need comfort." I remember a night years ago when I stood in my kitchen at 2 a.m. The house was quiet. Everyone was asleep. And there I was, eating spoonfuls of cold rice straight from the pot. I wasn't hungry. Not really. I was just hollow. I had spent the day performing normalcy, smiling, working, pretending to be okay. But something inside me was aching. A silent ache I didn't yet know how to name. And so I reached for food. Not to nourish, but to numb. That was the night I first whispered to myself, "A full stomach can't fill an empty heart." And that whisper was the beginning of a shift. In Buddhist monasteries, food is not rushed. It is not background noise. It is not something to be conquered or indulged in. It is received with mindfulness, eaten with gratitude, and most notably, it ends early in the day. Monks don't eat after noon, not as punishment, but out of deep respect for the body's rhythm. Because the body, like the earth, has cycles, times to take in, times to let go. But we, in modern life, forget this. We snack through the night. We eat out of habit. We scroll while chewing. We eat not because our bodies ask, but because our minds demand distraction. And that disconnection, over time, becomes suffering. We live in an age where food is everywhere. Supermarkets bursting with choices, meals delivered in minutes. Yet, despite all this abundance, people feel more tired, more bloated, more out of sync than ever. Why? Because nourishment isn't just about what you eat. It's about how and why you eat. A teacher once said to me, "You can eat a bowl of rice in stress, and it becomes poison. Or you can eat it in peace, and it becomes medicine." And that, I believe, is true. The act of eating is sacred, not because of the food itself, but because of the energy you bring to it. Try this sometime. Prepare a simple meal. Just 1 or 2 ingredients. Sit down. Turn off all screens. Place your hands on your bowl. Close your eyes. Take a breath. Then open your eyes and eat. Slowly. Notice the texture, the smell, the sound your teeth make when you chew. Notice when your body says, "Enough." And notice the difference when you actually listen. This is awareness. This is reverence. This is returning to the ritual that eating was always meant to be. And then, on another day, consider fasting. Not as punishment, not as control, but as rest, as a gentle clearing, like letting the soil breathe after harvest. In Buddhist tradition, fasting is practiced not to prove discipline, but to return the body to simplicity, to create space for energy to move, to listen more deeply to hunger, not just the physical kind, but the emotional kind. Because the truth is, fasting isn't just abstaining from food. It's becoming intimate with craving. And craving is a teacher. I remember my first mindful fast. It wasn't planned. I simply woke up one morning and felt a pull to be quiet. Not just with my words, but with what I consumed. So I skipped breakfast, and then lunch. Not out of rebellion, but out of curiosity. And what I found wasn't pain or fatigue, but clarity. The colors outside seemed brighter. The wind felt cooler. My thoughts slowed. My breath deepened. And by sunset, I sat with a cup of warm tea and felt full in a way food had never given me. Fasting, I realized, isn't about starving the body, it's about feeding the soul. But it must be done gently, kindly, not as a goal, not as a diet, but as a return. Return to emptiness, return to balance, return to listening. And that listening is where healing begins. In the West, we often talk about food in terms of control, calories, carbs, restrictions. But in Buddhism, food is talked about in terms of consciousness. What state are you in when you eat? Are you breathing? Are you rushing? Are you connected? Because how we eat is how we live. And when we eat with anxiety, we digest anxiety. When we eat with gratitude, we digest peace. There's an old saying in Zen, "The way you eat is the way you walk, the way you love, the way you die." So let food be more than fuel. Let it be a mirror. Let it show you where you're holding, where you're hurrying, where you're not yet home in your own body. And let fasting be more than abstaining. Let it be a practice of space, of not reaching, of letting desire pass without chasing it. Because in that pause, you may find what you were really hungry for all along. Maybe it's rest. Maybe it's stillness. Maybe it's just someone saying, you don't need to earn your worth through productivity. You're allowed to simply be. I once knew a woman who practiced one mindful fast every month. Not for health, not for weight, but to remind herself that emptiness isn't something to fear. That in letting go of food, even for a short time, she remembered her body's wisdom. She said it made her love food more, not less, because she was no longer a slave to it. She was its student. And so I invite you, gently, with no pressure, to explore your own rhythm. Notice when you eat. Notice how you eat. And most of all, notice why. Is it love? Or is it longing? Is it nourishment? Or is it numbing? There are no wrong answers, just deeper questions. And with each one, you get closer to a kind of wholeness that no gourmet dish can give you. A wholeness born from awareness, from choosing emptiness not as lack, but as space. A lotus grows in muddy water, and sometimes we must sit with that mud, not stuff it down, not avoid it with snacks and sugar. Just sit and breathe. And when you do eat, eat with joy, eat with reverence, eat like the monks do, with 2 hands, 1 bowl, and a heart that whispers, this, too, is sacred. Chapter 10. Like a leaf in autumn, letting go and letting heal. I used to believe that if I held on tight enough to a dream, to a person, to a version of myself that I thought I should be, then nothing would fall apart. But eventually, something always does. And I remember the exact moment when I learned that letting go doesn't mean failure. It means freedom. It was autumn. I was sitting beneath a Bodhi tree in a quiet monastery garden, watching the leaves fall. Not chaotically, not in panic, but in this graceful, slow surrender. 1 golden leaf floated gently, spun twice in the breeze, and landed softly on the ground. I watched it for a long time. That leaf wasn't clinging. It wasn't asking the tree for 1 more day. Simply let go, because it trusted the season. And I thought to myself, what if we could do that? What if we could release the past the way trees release their leaves? Not because it's easy, but because we're ready to bloom again. In Buddhist teachings, there's a story that always brings this truth to life. You may know it. 2 monks were traveling together and came to a river, where a woman stood, unable to cross. Without hesitation, the elder monk lifted her onto his back, carried her across, and set her down gently. They continued walking. Hours later, the younger monk, clearly upset, said, "We are monks. We're not supposed to touch women." And the elder simply smiled. "I set her down hours ago," he said. "Why are you still carrying her?" That line has stayed with me for years. Because how many of us are still carrying what should have been set down long ago? Old heartbreaks, harsh words, mistakes we made when we didn't know better, expectations we placed on others or ourselves, entire chapters of our lives that ended, but which we've been unwilling to close. And what does that holding on give us? Wait, stuckness, but not peace. Pain is real, yes, but suffering, deep, long, suffocating suffering, is what happens when we grip the pain long after it's passed. Like trying to hold water in your hands. The tighter you squeeze, the faster it escapes, and all you're left with is tension. There was a time in my own life when I clung to grief like it was identity. When my heart broke, I didn't just feel the loss, I wore it. I let it define every smile, every step forward. And a part of me believed that to let go would be to betray what I had lost. But healing doesn't erase love. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing not to carry the fire that's already burned through. It means trusting that something new wants to grow in its place. That same monk who spoke of the woman at the river also said, "You are not your thoughts. You are not your story. You are the sky, and everything else is just weather." So if you're walking today with heavy clouds, with storms of guilt or regret or sorrow, you're not doing it wrong. You're just weathering something. But beneath that weather is your sky. Clear, still, vast, always waiting. Sometimes Letting go looks like crying in your car because you finally admitted that a dream isn't working. Sometimes it looks like deleting a number from your phone that kept pulling you back into pain. Sometimes it's whispering to yourself at night, "I forgive you," even if you don't believe it fully yet. Letting go isn't a grand gesture. It's a quiet decision to stop resisting what already is. To stop asking, "Why did this happen?" and start asking, "How can I carry this with more grace?" You see, in Zen, the art of letting go is the art of presence. Because when you're truly here in this breath, this step, this sip of tea, you're not gripping the past anymore. You're just being. And in that being, healing begins. I once spoke to a man who carried the weight of his father's disapproval his whole life. Even after his father passed, the voice lingered, "You'll never be enough," until one day, he stood alone in the forest and shouted into the trees, "I'm done carrying your voice." And then he cried, not because he hated his father, but because he finally made room for his own voice to emerge. That is letting go, not because the past was easy, but because the future deserves space to breathe. When you walk barefoot on dewy grass at dawn, the earth doesn't ask where you've been. It welcomes you. When the sun rises each morning, it doesn't judge what you failed to do yesterday. It just offers light. And when a leaf lets go of the branch, it does not fear falling. Trusts the wind. And so I ask you gently, now, in the quiet of this moment, what are you still carrying? What weight have you convinced yourself you must bear, out of loyalty, out of guilt, out of fear? And what would happen if you set it down? If you said, "I'm allowed to be free. I'm allowed to move forward without the story. I'm allowed to stop bleeding from a wound that's no longer open," because you are. And when you do, when you release that grip, you'll feel something shift, not all at once, but slowly, like breath returning after a long cry, like silence after thunder, like the soft unfurling of a lotus bloom at sunrise, still damp from the night, but opening anyway. You'll remember that letting go isn't losing. It's making space. Space for joy. Space for peace. Space for the next chapter of your becoming. And maybe, just maybe, one day, someone will ask, "How did you heal?" And you'll smile gently and say, "I stopped carrying what wasn't mine anymore." So here we are, friend, at the end of the path, but not the end of the journey. You've walked through breath and stillness, through the aching weight of karma, through the quiet teachings of trees and tea and silence. And maybe along the way you've begun to feel it, the subtle return of trust. In your body, in your breath, in life itself. Because healing isn't some distant mountain you have to climb. It's the soft moss under your feet, already here. It's the forgiveness that rises like dawn, unasked but ready. It's the moment you whisper, "Maybe I don't have to fight so hard anymore." You've listened to the wind between thoughts. You've touched the lake within. And maybe now, what you plant, you become. What you let go of makes room for what wants to grow. The path forward is yours to walk, slowly, mindfully, with compassion as your lantern. And if something in this video stirred your heart, opened a window where a wall used to be, I'd love to hear from you. What touched you most? Which teaching will you carry into tomorrow? Tell me in the comments below. Let's keep walking this path together. And if you haven't yet, light that small candle for our community by subscribing. Not just to a channel, but to a shared way of seeing, of being, of healing. Until next time, breathe gently, walk slowly, and remember, the lotus blooms right where it's planted. Even here, even now.